Hello, strangers. But it's funny, because you look kind of familiar. There's a story in my family about how we came to North America. It was boats, mystery solved. Just kidding. But now I know why Gordon Lightfoot always puts me in a pensive mood. My people came over to Canada and branched out from there. This story is very old, and everyone who lived it long passed on. But thanks to the verbal storytelling way of remembering and a little journal with neat Palmer script, well, here's what I know about Story 27. When my family reached Canada, the whole new world was open to them. Some became Canadian railroad men, some homesteaded, and some decided hunting was the move. But this wasn't trophy hunting or for sport. This was survival. The villagers, pressed to expand north and to the west, weren't just losing the occasional chicken. In fact, the wolves that hung about didn't bother much with smaller prey at all. They wanted bigger, more challenging, more meat. The fledgling government of Canada offered a financial reward for the successful harvest of wolves, itself a grimly stark acknowledgement of the wolves' own reaping of their livestock, and occasionally, themselves. This was ages ago, and the leadership wanted their folks safe, and that included their cattle, as well as elk and moose. So, my great-great-grandfather Jack, he made the tracking and hunting of wolves his business. He ran with a couple of fellows and hunted mostly at night. Adding to the complication, it was bounty per recognizable pelt, meaning that while the guns they shot had bullets as round and heavy as marbles with plenty of stopping power, that kind of shot would cost them as it obliterated the animal. At around $50 a wolf, or $5,500 today, they didn't have much to play with there. The guns were a last resort. For most kills, Jack and his friends had to use arrows, snares, and knives. Being up close and personal with that amount of danger, yet getting away with it over and over. Another successful hunt in Rupert's Land, the exact area being Manitoba today. Well, maybe that's why he got a little cocky. And when he and his friends heard about a wolf, one that had drug as many as 2 men into the woods to messily devour them, that was fetching triple the bounty, Jack and one of his friends, Terry, the owner of the journal, as it turns out, couldn't pass it up. The reports beyond the 2 men it had killed, full-grown, strong men at that, well, they were grim. The wolf was estimated to be near 200 pounds by his tracks and a couple of witness accounts. Dark as pitch, which was wondrous to them. The timber wolves and Manitoba wolves, the common ones Jack hunted, were all gray wolves. They weren't normally black. Anyway, a few men were found torn apart in the woods. Cattle and wild game, too. Mix in a healthy dose of superstition, and you get a monster story. One worth triple the bounty. Jack and Terry hiked out, selecting a little cabin. There were plenty of these dotted throughout the brush to house hunters. Jack and Terry picked it and bedded down, but not before snaring a few hares and setting snares all around the property, bait to lure in this mega wolf. Then they went back to the cabin and got ready. Jack was nervy about it. At 200 pounds, he knew the snares didn't have a chance of holding. So they made a plan sleep for a bit, then go out and check every so often. They got a candle out, poked nails into it, and went to sleep. When the candle had time to burn and melt long enough, a nail would fall out and hit the tin holder, waking them. At the first nail hit, the game was afoot. They checked 2 snares, no problems there, but the third was gone. All that was left was a little red spot in the snow where the bait had been. A few feet away, they found the snare. The rawhide strips had been snapped. This was tough old leather, and something had chewed through it in no time at all. The next snare had been tripped, and the stick used still trapped in it. Think about that. It used a tool. Ever hear of a wolf knowing how to use a tool? Crows using tools happen every day, but wild dogs in the 1800s. At any rate, all the traps were checked, and the ones that had been tripped were all north of the cabin, which happened to be off to the side of the cabin. Worse, night was falling, and with that, a dusting of that fine, powdery snow, unseasonal for October in the western interior. Mind. But with everything else that had happened in the story, snow was just about as normal as it could get. Jack and Terry set the traps, this time supplementing with 4 shiny, gleaming metal traps. The snares had never been meant to hold the wolf, just to teach it that snares, traps, were easy to get out of. To get its guard down, and then get it with something it couldn't chew through. So they set the traps, replaced some bait, and this time no candle or nail trick was needed. There was no more sleep that night. They sat up, listening for the forest to tip them to the wolf's return. There's always noise in the forest if you pay attention. You hear birds and squirrels foraging about and the like. Sure enough, like a ripple from the north, the sounds faded and stopped. Jack knew something big enough to put a fright in birds high up in the trees had materialized. Its sour, gamey odor as much a warning to the woodland critters as a fire alarm. And that's when they heard it. And I quote that little leather journal here. For in that clear and quiet night did come another sound, the rattle of a throat being cleared. The words were French, but not the patois of a Frenchman. The voice said, "Tu entends ça?" They were surprised to hear words, that a man was out there in the woods when such a dangerous wolf was rumored to be in the area. And he didn't sound well. His voice was muffled, rough, cloddy. Jack rose to throw open the door, but Terry stopped him, struck with terror. Because while Jack had made the logical leap of what the sound was, Terry instead was totally convinced it wasn't a man at all, and that the sound to his own ear was not a man speaking a language he knew, but an animal repeating sounds without understanding of meaning. Of course, Jack shook him off. Rival hunter or no, he couldn't in good conscience leave a man out in the woods with a wolf canny enough to use tools and with a known death toll on him. Jack went to the door, flung it open, and stood there searching the dark, for whatever had stolen the sound of the forest had stolen the light as well. He listened, but it was silent. He was about to tell Terry off about holding him back from helping the supposed hunter out in the woods. But then suddenly, and seeming much closer, like the mystery man had sprinted, he heard the words again. In French, "Tu entends ça?" But now it was Jack whose heart began to drum. because Terry was right. The words sounded mindless, like a parrot repeating phrases with no comprehension, or a bird call built to mimic a sound with no context of what the sound even meant. And what are bird calls built to do? Flush out prey for the hunter, of course. Terry was pulling at his arm, panicked, saying that it wasn't right. This was wrong, and what they heard was no man. That they needed to go back and bolt the door, or heaven help them. Then, movement. That a shape materialized from the dark, shambling. There was only one animal known to hunters that looked like two triangles on top of each other. And he's right, all those years ago. The shape of a man stands out in nature for the way the shoulders to arms, hips to legs, make the shape of two triangles, one on top of the other. They still teach that in survival school. It looked as a man, bundled in furs and skins, a monstrous wolf hide with the head, creating a kind of hood over the man's own. Jack called to Terry, "It be a man and one who is in peril, and you'd have us leave him to die." The hood twitched, and Jack's burst of renewed faith died. The wolf's head turned, and light from the open cabin door caught the eyes of it wearing the mess of skins and hides. It was peeking out mischievously, like it was a Halloween mask, like a child about to play a prank. Quoting the journal, the eyes did not report the light as a living animal. The eyes were dull, dried as a puddle of blood. "Tu entends ça," it repeated, and took a shambling step forward. As it did, Jack saw its arms did not swing. Only its legs moved, and those, the two men, with sudden but certain terror, fell back, slamming the door. Terry was still in shock, refusing to move from the door until Jack dragged a table across it to bar it in place. They didn't know what unspeakable horror show was outside, but as hunters, they knew camouflage when they saw it. The shape, the voice, the mindlessly repeated human language. It was all camouflage. For that step revealed legs that copied the idea of a man's, too straight with sole knee joint. But the step he took forward showed a leg that bent on a knee jointed backwards as a bird's. A heavy step on the wooden stair to the cabin. Thunk. Another. Thud. A lifeless dangling hand thrown at the door in sick parody of a knock. The thing had closed yards of distance and was at the door. Again, as though it had put its borrowed lips against the door frame, it called, soothingly but thick and clotted. "Tu entends ça?" Jack and Terry backed from the door. They had their guns out and at the ready. They stayed there, the thuds of it throwing its hands against the door over and over, sounding through the cabin well into the night. The next thing they knew, the presence of it was gone from the door, but they still didn't move from their post. It hung around, now aimlessly testing the concept of knocking against the other walls of the cabin, like a child trying to copy something they saw their parents do, but not understanding why. Thuds, followed by the sludgy little phrase en français, and that equally gravelly sound of it either clearing its throat or having a laugh. Jack looked at Terry, whose panic had receded, but where his hands were clasped together in prayer, the knuckles and skin were stretched white. And looking at that, prayer to God to deliver them from evil, well, that seemed like a great idea, so Jack joined him. The sounds stopped at some point, and the men were left exhausted and reeling. Perhaps they were pioneers in a concept that wouldn't be popularized for another 50 years with the advent of the Great War, that being shell shock. But they got up, and with the light of dawn filtering in through the gaps of the cabin, they felt that they were safe, and the worst that could have happened already had. They approached the door, listening, confirming that the shambling creature was gone. It was dead silent outside, unnerving but assuredly clear of the creature. They pushed aside the table, opened the door, and looked out. All 4 of the shiny metal spring traps had been sprung and were lined up like soldiers on the bottom step to the cabin. A pile of sinew directly next to the impotently gleaming traps was discovered to be the snares, every bit of their handiwork diffused and laid prone, their defenses asunder in a futile heap. And what lay beyond the destroyed traps, spread out in a half circle in front of the cabin, were parts of animals. The front legs of a deer, wolf heads, gray and mottled, their tongues unspooled and flaccid. 2 jackdaws, their fine feathers in disarray. And, most horrid and wringing fear and sickness from hearts drained, a human arm, fair and delicate, as lily-white as the powdery snow. Tracks, dragging, giant tracks, circled everywhere. For the evil cloaked in that borrowed attire, camouflaged in what fur and skin it had torn from its kills, to Jack and Terry's mind had set up a congregation, a mockery of God with an assembly of a church gathering of the damned. Jack and Terry were stunned. They crossed themselves, leapt on legs stiff as old hide over the piles of traps and desecration surrounding them, and they set off for town like the devil himself was chasing them. In looking through the journal, I found the area he'd described was very likely the Mackenzie River Valley. The Mackenzie River Valley happens to be home to the largest wolf in non-prehistoric reckoning, the Mackenzie wolf. And yes, Mackenzie wolves can come in pitch black. As for the rest of the story, though, theorizing is necessary. Was it possible for this journal entry to just be shell shock from a hunter over encountering an inhumanly large wolf? Surely a wolf could have dragged traps around, even known to return them, like some weird prototype for fetch. But why? The bits and pieces of animals described had viable meat. Why would a wolf go to the trouble, with winter coming on and food becoming less and less available, to waste food to, what? Scare a couple of hunters? Why circle a fortified cabin? Heck, a wolf on his hind legs would explain the jointed legs, but how did that explain what they heard? Not just the clumsy parody of knocking, but a whole sentence in French. For that, the emerging theory from my family is as follows. Canada was full of French fur traders, and the thing, which was not a wolf, was Frankensteining together a disguise from bits and pieces of what it had caught. The point of camouflage is to blend in. Viceroy butterflies camouflage to blend in with monarchs, to look poisonous and bitter to birds and avoid being eaten. Other animals camouflage to gain the element of surprise. Whatever its motives, the thing Jack and Terry met in the woods, it wanted to blend in. It knew about what parts went where, head on top, 2 legs, but it didn't get the details right. The legs were on backwards. It knocked by throwing its hand at the door and then walls and windows, not just controlling the arm, and not a man. And what else do we have? The ability to communicate with spoken words. To us, sound has meaning, like words themselves do. But to something inhuman, the sound we make doesn't sound like it's specific or meaningful beyond that's just the sound they make. Like how all crow caws sound the same to us. So to complete its disguise, what better final touch than to sound like us? I think I think it just took the last line it heard off its human victims and mindlessly repeated it like a hunter blowing through a duck call. It explains why the call it made was chu on ton sa, French for "you hear that?" And what would you say to your friends or family if, late at night in the woods, you thought you saw something, heard something moving? Hey, do you hear that? I mean, given my family, it could also be that Great-Grandpa Jack was in his cups at the time. But I don't know that I would buy that this is the story of a drunk man. His Palmer script was too neat for that, and I don't know why he would have taken the time to write it all down if he was truly just on a bender. And there's something spooky about those desolate woods. Even now that they're more populated and civilized and known, there's a reason we stay out of the woods at night. If you'd like to reach out, email and socials are in the description. Interacting with the like, comment, and subscribe features does something, allegedly. And otherwise, we'll meet again next Tuesday. Stay strange, stay safe, and take care, strangers.